Hi, I'm your host Vasco Duarte. Welcome to the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast, where we share tips and tricks from Scrum Masters around the world. Every day, we bring you inspiring answers to important questions that all Scrum Masters face day after day. Hello, everybody. Welcome to one more week of the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast. And this week, joining us from beautiful South Carolina in the US is Mark Metze. Hi, Mark. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Vasco. And from South Carolina, I guess I'll have to say, hey, y'all.
Indeed. Stay in character, as they say. Very good. So Mark started following the pattern of all good computer science majors. He began his career as a programmer, devoted his first 2 decades of his career to the craft of writing code. His next decade was spent in a managerial role for a software team, and then recently he pivoted once again to the role of Scrum Master. Mark likes to say that he has a heart for leading through service and has enthusiastically embraced the role of the Scrum Master. So it's great stuff because that's what we're going to talk about here the whole week. Mark, that was a short intro. Tell us a little bit more about yourself and how did you end up becoming a Scrum Master in the first place?
Sure. Yeah. So like you mentioned, began in college as a computer science major. So that's my background. That's really what I started the career as a coder, a software developer, a programmer. So that's really my background. And I had the opportunity to move into a management position. It always kind of considered that, when you get to a certain age, you're like, do I really want to make the move to management or do I want to stay technical? Well, I had the offer to come to a very small software company and really loved the ownership and the environment that they had. So I came on as a manager of a small development group, and I had been doing that for about 9 years. And when the pandemic hit, Vasco, I found myself with some additional time that I didn't have before. My normal commute is between 30 minutes and an hour, depending on traffic one way. And when I found myself working at home, I had this extra time, and it really allowed me to reflect on my career, where I had been, where I want to go. And I just found myself drawn to this servant leader idea. And my parents, they really emulated a servant leader mindset. And that was the way that I was brought up. That's the way that I was raised. So it was, as you would say, it was really almost essential for me and my values. So what I did is I approached the VP that I reported to as a development manager, and I made a pitch, because in a small company, you have to wear lots of different hats, right? There's just too much work and not enough people to do the work. So I was sort of doing a Scrum Master as a development manager. Probably not the best fit. In fact, I know it's not the best fit. But what I did is I sold my VP on the value of a full-time Scrum Master, and really focusing on teams, creating high-performing, self-managing, self-organizing teams. And it took some doing, but they said, okay, I buy that. I see the value that you're telling me now. I understand.
They probably said, I hear the talk. Now let's walk the talk.
Exactly. So actually the next question was, all right, you've sold me on the idea of a Scrum Master. Now, where do we find a Scrum Master? Where do we go? Because this is a foreign position. We don't have anything like that in our current company. Where do we go? You may call this sneaky, you may call it underhanded, possibly even a bait and switch. But I said, I know somebody who would be really good for this position. I said, really? Well, can you introduce me? And I was like, yeah, let's do it right now. You're looking at him. So that was an interesting conversation. But after some persuasion, and I kind of had my stuff together and had my arsenal, and I was able to sell myself as being the first Scrum Master for the company. And I was able to pivot in my career, which may seem ludicrous to some people, that you want to move from a management position to one where you really have no authority. But it aligned with my value system, and as they say, the rest is history.
Absolutely. And that aspect of aligning with your value system is very important. A lot of the people that we interview here on the podcast pretty much compare being a Scrum Master akin to having a vocation for that work. And I think it's very important to recognize that, especially for us, the early adopters, because even though Scrum is nearly 20, well, a bit over 20 years old now, the fact is that we are still in the early adoption phase of Agile. And let's not forget that. Anyway, let's dive into one of those questions, those stories that we go through as newbie Scrum Masters, perhaps, but also as experienced Scrum Masters, which is that story of failure. Today's Fail Monday, so we like to explore a story where you, Mark, although you were doing your best at the time, quickly realized the best just wasn't good enough at that time. And we want to explore that because, of course, we want to take the learnings and the insights and evolve from that. But before we dive into the learnings and the conclusions, tell us that story, Mark.
So I've got lots of stories to tell on failure. And I have to choose one because we have a limited amount of time. There's a time box, right?
Absolutely.
So I'll start with, I follow a gentleman on LinkedIn by the name of Chris Stone, and he has a variety of extremely creative retrospective formats, and they're fun. And I'm the type personality that, I tend to like humorous movies, and that's just kind of my personality. So I said, you know what? There's this one retrospective format on the movie Home Alone during Christmas time. And it's a classic movie here in the States. If you haven't seen it, I'll just tell you really quick. It's about a young boy by the name of Kevin. And it's set at Christmas time. And his family goes away on a trip, but they accidentally leave him behind. I'm giving air quotes, home alone. So poor little Kevin is home alone. And then these bumbling two robbers try to break into the house because they think that no one's home. And the fun part of the movie are all the elaborate creative tricks that Kevin uses to foil these two bumbling thieves that are trying to rob the home. All right. So for this retrospective format, picture in your mind a retrospective board, and then picture taking a screenshot of different scenes from the movie. Let's just say 6 scenes. And so you have those 6 pictures, 3 on each side of the board. And below each one of those 6, there's a quote that corresponds to those pictures. And then below each one of the quotes, you have some interesting questions that relate to a retrospective. So it kind of links the picture, the quote from the movie, and the questions together. So for an example, if you haven't seen the movie, it's not going to make a lot of sense to you. But for those that have, there was one that had a picture of Kevin, and the quote was, "Keep the change, you filthy animal."
Oh, nice voiceover there.
And the question related was, what changes have we introduced as a team that haven't worked? And what do we need to reconsider? Well, there was a single card that was added to this section of the retrospective board. And that card said, "This retrospective format." Boy, what a punch in the gut. I'll tell you what, I thought I had hit a home run, and boy, went down swinging. So I swallowed my pride and asked the team, I was like, guys, I'm sorry, but how did I miss? What was the miss here? Why is this so horrible? And they explained, well, for us, we make observations during the sprint and we record those. And then when we come into the sprint, we don't have to think as much. We can just put those on the board. And by having these questions pre-populated, now I have to map my answers to your questions, and it's annoying and it's difficult. So I said, yeah, I can understand that. And the other part was, they just didn't see the fun as something that added value. They really saw it
that
as
fun. I would say they didn't see that fun as adding value. Maybe some other fun they would see as adding value.
Very good point. Very good point. But they just said they just saw it as fluff, and they just wanted to get to the meat and potatoes of the retrospective and jump right in. So
I love this story because it has, first of all, it has two completely different aspects that I think are great examples for Scrum Master. So the first is to care so much about the, in this case, the retrospective, so the facilitation that we do, that we actually do some homework. We prepare things, right? And you said the word fun. Myself, I'm more towards the insightful kind of person. So I like to go deeper. Like I like to focus on the aha moments. So I like to use metaphors. Of course, this was a metaphor also in some aspects, but I like to use like visual metaphors, like the sailing boat or the trip to the Everest, to Mount Everest, or whatever there is. And so that's one aspect, caring enough to actually prepare something that is out of the ordinary. And then the other thing is, and I think this is a sin that I've committed many times myself, which is to think that as a Scrum Master, I know what they need. So I'm going to prepare something that they can't resist, right? Make them an offer they can't resist. And I think that this is something that perhaps most of our listeners are doing, maybe even every day. It's like thinking that as a Scrum Master, they know what the team needs. And I think that your story illustrates how sometimes it's better to stand back and just ask, what would be a fun retro format for you guys? That was my takeaway. How about you, Mark? What do you want our listeners to take away from this story?
Couldn't agree more, Vasco. I'll just add, Paul Harvey, I'm dating myself, but Paul Harvey would always make a comment on his radio show, and then there's the rest of the story. But the rest of the story is, I just said, okay, got it. Let's just drop back to the formats that we had used before, the tried and true start, stop, keep, 4 L's, those types of very simple retrospectives. And what I found was the team was very thoughtful. They really were present during those retrospectives, and they came up with some really, really insightful actions on how to improve over the course of the next sprint and forward. And what I saw my failure was I was focused more on me and what I was bringing to the team, not what the team saw, what brought value to the team. So that was, for me, that was the biggest lesson that I learned.
Yeah, exactly. Start from them, not from you, right? And I think one simple tip is really just like I kind of said in my analysis, maybe just ask them, like, what would be a fun retro format for you guys? And I think that, you went back to the default format because that's what they had said. But why not, like, give them permission to have fun in the retro and just say, how about organizing a fun format? Right? And then at that point, if they say yes, obviously, you could say, okay, so who would like to volunteer? Right? Because it is true, like, sometimes, like what you said is very important. You realize that even though you were using the default, well, not so well, needs to change, whatever that is, you allow them space to be, comfortable, perhaps, maybe that's the word here. And they were able to be insightful and thoughtful, and they got value out of those retros. And some teams are like that. Some teams are just perfectly happy to do the default format, and they can still get a lot of value out of the retrospective and not be bored, as an example.
And there is a level of empiricism too, right? So if you never try new things, you're never going to get anything different. So yes, this was a miss, but I can honestly say, used empiricism to try something, it didn't work. So we adapted and went a different direction.
Yeah, and move on. That was a great story. Thank you for sharing that, Mark.
Sure thing.
Monday is about what we learn from our obstacles and our failures. But tomorrow is Team Tuesday here on the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast. We explore teams and their journeys, the habits they develop that threaten their performance, how each of our guests helped their teams evolve, and the one key lesson they learned from that experience. We really hope you liked our show. And if you did, why not rate this podcast on Stitcher or iTunes? Share this podcast and let other Scrum Masters know about this valuable resource for their work. Remember that sharing is caring.